Hello everybody and welcome to Chess Diagnostic. This is Andrew and today I'm in my wild apartment living room, and the reason for that is just because the compression and the audio artifacts in the last two videos I'm not too happy with, so I'm just using my more basic setup until I can figure that out. So we are on position 21 and in Rook Endgames. You'll notice that this position is basically the same as position 20, just one move or square different with the rook. And it looks like we're going to basically go through the same lines, but actually it's a lot more complicated than that as it first seems. So let's get into it. Now, why is black going to have a different result in this position versus the last one? Well, the reason is he's on that 6th square instead of the 7th or the 8th away from the king. It might seem like a small difference, but it's actually quite huge. So whether it's white or black to move, white should win. But there are quite a few pitfalls. So let's see what happens. Obviously, if it's white to move, he'll just checkmate, so we won't even go through that. The rook would interpose, and we take, and then the king is trapped. So after rook to c8, it looks like black can check again, and obviously the king doesn't want to go to d6 right away because black would just take the pawn, and then it is a draw. But if he goes, if white goes king to e6 and then the rook back down, it's actually quite a trap for white because it looks like if he plays king to d7, is he going to win? Well, not necessarily. After the correct move, rook to a8, now it suddenly is a draw because black was able to fix his mistake and get on the 8th square away from the king, and now he can check endlessly. Let's go through an example line. So if he tries to deflect that rook, then he'll just play rook to b8. If the rook comes back, rook to a8. And if the king tries to escape, either he'll give his pawn away, or if he tries to come after that rook, then he can always just come back, and there's no progress that can be made. Check. All right, so we covered that simple error. So it's a little more complicated. You can't just attack that rook because it's a little closer, but it does allow white an opportunity. Let's go back here. So instead of, after rook to c8, instead of king to d7, what if he plays king to e7, maybe another check, and then what do you think the correct move is here? Obviously, we don't just want to repeat moves, but if he plays king to f6, and if black tries to check, then he actually can escape it. Black comes back down. Obviously, if he checks, then we'll just bring the king closer. But in this case, if he brings the rook back down, then we have an intermediary move that allows white to solve all his problems. And what do you think that move is? We don't want to deflect yet, but rook to g6 solves all these problems because now we have a rook that can prevent checks on the 6th rank, as well as support that pawn. So if the king comes up, we can actually play rook to c6, hitting that rook, and now obviously if black takes, then we get a queen versus a rook, and it should be a one ending. This is a theoretical ending, so you can study that on your own if you need to, but it should be a win. It might be somewhat difficult, but he should be able to win it. And the main idea in this type of ending is basically just to get the king somewhere where you can basically fork the king and the rook at the same time. All right, let's go back here. So if black decides to put up a little stiffer resistance and plays rook to f8, then the king comes in. There's no more checks. And now he can simply bring the rook over and play rook to e8. Eventually trading that rook and basically queening his pawn. And so he enacts his plan here. If he checks, then we can actually go after that rook, and there's nothing that can be done. Game over. Alright, so you'll see that this position has obviously the positions that keep going on. They teach you concepts, but they can be very complicated compared to what it seems and how specific squares matter so much in the end result, theoretically at least. And also practically, when you're looking at these endings with a table base or a computer, it can almost give a false sense of security. For each of these positions, I'd recommend when you see it, if you really want to learn it, to set it up on a board and try to figure out, what would I play? Because a lot of times when you get these over the board, it might seem like, okay, I'll attack that rook here, and then you'll learn that's a huge theoretical mistake, and the opponent could have done something. But there's some endings, even by Capablanca, who is considered an ending master, where you'll see he plays against like the women's world champion or even against Alekhine, and they end up making huge blunders in simple endings, and even though they're endgame geniuses. So just keep that in mind when you're studying these endings, and to also look at lines that would seem intuitive. All right, so I hope that helped, and I'm glad that we're going through these series, and hopefully the audio is a lot smoother from now on. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the future. Bye.